Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike. I'm back here, joined with my good buddy Ryan Gibo, and this is our yet to be named podcast where we're going to discuss kind of all things mindfulness. What a crazy big triggering term for a lot of people.
Right.
I think we're gonna try to define that for us so we know what we're talking about, and we're going to talk about aspects of mindfulness that I would consider both of us, experts in related fields here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk about mindful eating. Ryan's a registered dietitian and nutritionist. Then we're going to talk about mindful athletics coaching. It's kind of where my wheelhouse falls in. Then we're going to talk about mindful practice. We'll wrap it up with some anecdotes and some stuff that we do from our own life, stuff that we have in common. So, mindfulness, what is it? How do we define it? What do you, I'll leave it here. Let you start.
Yeah. What is mindfulness? Well, I think when we were talking earlier, the definition of mindfulness came up, and how I view it is essentially being aware of the thoughts that you're having, the actions you're taking, the behaviors you're engaging with in the moment that they are happening. And that's really hard.
Yeah, that is really hard. It's interesting how there's only a few things that tend to have the word practice afterward, right? Yoga practice, mindfulness practice. It almost really helps you to understand when you think about practice that you may never be expert. You may never get all the way there. It truly turns out to be about the practice.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to have this conversation with a 10-year-old recently. And we went through some exercises that you can do to be mindful. At the end, I said, give me your definition. And as any good 10-year-old she says, well, I think it's like paying attention on purpose.
Ooh.
And I feel like whether she knew it or not, she drilled right down to the very core of what mindfulness is.
Yeah.
And I think that when we hear that word or we think about the word, we tend to make it this big grand thing, that requires us to sit and think or not think or watch or listen or whatever the case may be. But I think when we start to really just say mindfulness is paying attention on purpose, and I like how you added in the moment. We're all mindful of our behavior, an hour ago. Right. We're all very capable of sitting and reflecting on the things that we liked or didn't like about a conversation or the way we behaved. But the question is, how aware can we be of the moment that we're in?
Right.
And as we start to progress down this path of mindfulness, this is something I'm learning rapidly. Rapidly, I wish. See how I just did that? I'm learning that as I practice mindfulness more, I not only am I being more aware of my own behavior, thoughts, actions towards others, but I'm starting to understand what's driving them and what emotion is prevalent in me that is causing me to do whatever the good, bad action is. Luckily, I'm grateful and thankful that lately it's been good actions, right? But even those good actions, when you stop and really say to yourself, why? What did I do that for? And be quiet or quiet the mind and just allow yourself to understand why you did it. There's an emotion there or a thought. So that kind of leads me into, topic number one for our podcast, and like mindful eating, right? What does that look like? When I think about mindful eating, I think about I probably make it a little more silly than it is. Looking at my food and definitely slowing down, of course. But I'll leave it to you. I'll ask you, what does that kind of mean in general?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a complicated topic, and sometimes it's helpful to think about, the opposite, right? What does mindless eating look like, right? Where you're shoveling food into your mouth and you're not even you're not even tasting it, you're not appreciating it. Maybe you're less conscious of the type of foods that you're eating. Maybe you're less conscious about how you're eating those foods, or how you're engaging with food, right? And so mindful eating would essentially just be being present as you're eating and making a choice, and maybe not even maybe removing the idea of choice, right? Because mindfulness is not necessarily about the choice of what it is that you eat, or um, whatever the topic is. It's not a choice. It's more just being aware of what's going on. And so when we're specifically talking about mindfulness around a meal, I'll often tell people, well, let's slow down to begin with, and let's really appreciate what's going on here. What kind of sensations are we experiencing? And that is also quite challenging, to slow down eating and to really hone in to what a food tastes like, what it smells like, what does it look like, what does it feel like. One exercise that I sometimes have people do is I will say, let's try this meal. And when you come back to talk with me, I want you to describe that food that you ate as if I had no idea what that food was. Right? Like, okay, I ate an Oreo. It's chocolate with some whipped cream in the middle, or cream, whatever. Okay, well, what does chocolate taste like? What does the cream filling taste like? Is it soft? Is it like a whoopie pie? What is this Oreo truly when you break it down to just the sensory aspects? And you could describe the fact that it's crunchy and that it's got a little salty, a little saltiness to it, a little sweetness to it. But really, the practice of trying to describe it is the hard thing, right? It's like when you were in school and the teacher had you describe how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and he or she would play devil's advocate on, you know, the way you described how to make a peanut butter and jelly. Well, where did you get the knife? Well, how did you open up the peanut butter? How did you spread it on? Right? Like, but it's the same thing here with eating. Okay, well, how did what is the flavor of chocolate? What is that really like? And this is not something that you have to do all the time. And so when I bring up mindfulness and paying close attention to what it is that you're eating, people often think it's just like, yeah, staring at your food and just focusing on that, right? But I mean, we all have lives, and you want to go out to eat with your wife, or you want to go out to eat with some friends, or you've got a party, or there's something at work. You can't sit there and just stare at your food, right? You can't do that, but you can take a moment to. You can take one moment and tune into the taste, tune into the smell, tune into the texture. Just give it just, just be a little aware, right? And that helps. It really does, especially when we were talking about satisfying foods. And you really get satisfaction. You get more satisfaction from paying close attention to something like ice cream, right? In one of our previous discussions, we were talking about the bowl of ice cream, and maybe eating ice cream appropriately looks like one scoop for someone, but they're so used to having the full bowl and getting the satisfaction from the full bowl and the feeling that comes from the full bowl that it's very hard to eat it more appropriately. But when you're extra mindful during the process of eating ice cream, you might find that one scoop provides the same amount of satisfaction that 3 or 4 scoops would. Because in the 3 or 4 scoops example, you were eating mindlessly. You shoveled it in. It took you 2 minutes to eat it. Whereas maybe the one scoop, maybe that takes you 5-10 minutes, and you do it nice and slow, and you really savor it. And this is often what people report to me, is that they just generally get more satisfaction with eating when they eat it mindfully.
Wow. Well said. I think, when you started off by saying looking at your food, and, I know people eat with their eyes. That's what they say. But for me, something's going to have to be glaringly wrong quickly for me to not eat it. But I think, even just that practice of maybe pausing and looking at your plate of food that you've created for yourself. I think there's probably something there when it comes to, and I don't want to get into religion or spirituality, but, historically we seem to have, said grace for the food before we ate, or said a prayer for this food before we ate. And I think it can certainly relate to a mindfulness practice to be able to take that pause. And whether you're, grateful for yourself for being able to afford and create the food that you're eating, or, if there's an entity or deity out there that you attribute it to. But in the end, I think that's all getting after the same thing. It's all being more present in the moment, paying attention on purpose to the food that you're about to consume. And any tips or thoughts on how you might be mindful towards the end of the meal, right? That ice cream that did take you the 5 minutes or so to eat, is there any tips to not just go and get another, I'm historically someone that's gonna have that whole bowl, and having one scoop, the thought of having one scoop at the currently as we speak, I'm like, but what about the other scoop or two? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah. It is challenging to be a human and trying to take care of yourself when we have this abundance of resource. And in many ways, that luxury is a problem for us. Humans are designed to eat as much as we can, as fast as we can, whenever we can, because obviously we never had a period of time where there was so much food abundance. And so we do real well with eating large amounts in a small, in a confined time period, I suppose, and then storing that and going X number of hours or days or potentially a week until we eat again. And this has been how our bodies have developed. And so, yeah, we've got to fight a little bit against that. And this is why it's so hard to stop ourselves, such as when we get to the end of the bowl. And so for that, I would say this is absolutely where mindfulness around eating can come in. And, we were talking about really paying attention to the reasons why you're eating. And so you finish this bowl of ice cream, which may or may not have been because you were hungry. Could have been a reward, or could have been just because you like ice cream. But at the end there, are you still hungry? Do you actually need more ice cream? And really just trying to get in touch with yourself that way. Because we're wired to eat as much as we can, as fast as we can, whenever we can, it is helpful to manage that in some way. So make it a little harder for you to get the ice cream, right? Make it, even in the example of like takeout, plate up an appropriate portion, a portion that you can work with, and put the rest away, because that is what I would call a management strategy. it forces you to make a decision. It would force you to make a decision to get up and get more. And in the process of making that decision, the process of getting up and getting more, opening the freezer and taking out the ice cream, you really want to work on asking yourself those questions about, am I hungry? What am I searching for if I'm not hungry? Why am I eating this ice cream if I'm not hungry? Well, it's because I'm celebrating. Well, didn't you celebrate with the first bowl? Was that not enough?
Well, I like that. I think I know I've seen success, and we can continue to use the ice cream because it's so relevant to me. I've seen success getting a smaller portion, putting the ice cream away, getting my bowl, taking it over to the couch, and I always just chalked it up to being lazy, too lazy to go get another bowl of ice cream. But in the end, I think, it gave me an opportunity, right, to be mindful about whether or not I wanted to make that decision that I know wouldn't serve me in the future, even though, maybe in the moment my taste buds will thank me. I know it won't serve me the next morning when I wake up and I had just eaten 2 bowls of ice cream. So that's good. I like that. I think that's, something back to the practice aspect of it, something that we can add or implement, or maybe our listeners can add or implement to their daily practice.
Another tip in that regard to help you or a listener out is trying to envision yourself having whatever food it is that you're searching for without any stimulation. What would it look like for you to get that second bowl of ice cream and eat it without the phone, without TV, at the table, just you and that bowl of ice cream, or you and the whatever food? And more often than not, you would find that that's not really something you want to do. You think about that and you're like, I don't really want to eat a sad bowl of ice cream at the table. That's not what you're looking for. If you were truly hungry, if you were really hungry, you would be fine with that idea. You wouldn't be happy about the fact that you don't have the TV on, or you don't have a friend to talk to, or your phone's not with you. But it would be fine because you're hungry. There's a real drive there. But if you're not hungry, that idea sounds miserable. It doesn't sound fun. And so this is something that I'll recommend people try, or I'll do it. And it's not, the point is not to go and do that, to eat sad bowls of ice cream at the table. The point is just to think about it. If you were to do that, would that feel good? And if the answer is no, then it's probably not a good idea to go and just overstimulate with the TV on and the phone next to you, and as you're eating ice cream unmindfully. It's just to think about, why you're doing the things that you do. So that is another helpful little strategy that you can use.
I love that. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about how many times in my recent history I've actually only done the one thing. I've only done the eating, right? I'm either talking about my day with my wife, or I'm watching TV, or I got my laptop open trying to finish something I was trying to finish throughout the day. So just that eye-opening thought. I can't tell you the last time I've just done the one thing, or even if it's breakfast, it's the grabbing it on the go. So I'm driving while eating, or or stuffing it in my mouth as I'm getting ready, and same thing with lunches, right? Where many of us are doing that in the middle of our workday, and we're certainly not stopped completely enjoying this food that we're putting into our body. So, wow. I really appreciate that as a recommendation, and something I know I personally can take to heart.
Yeah, because I think, we were talking earlier too, and talking about how satisfaction is a very real reason why we choose to eat. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I always make the argument that we need satisfying foods that are enjoyable to eat. And we need to satisfy that criteria or that need within our diet. And when you are super distracted all the time, you've got multiple things going on, such as you're in the car, eating, on the phone, talking to your wife, road raging at the person in front of you. How are you being satisfied by that meal? I mean, I can't think of anything less satisfying than eating in the car. And I often tell people to just not do that unless you really need to, which in that case, I mean, food is a fuel type of thing. But unless you really need to, why are you eating in the car? And I mean, we were talking just before this too, where like we were having a conversation, and then I got a couple of texts, and I was like, I got to answer these, and the quality of our conversation was absolutely diminished by the fact that I had an additional distraction there. And so this is the case for everything, not just eating. When you've got a lot going on, it's hard to be satisfied by, the one important thing there. And so to be thinking about that is absolutely to your benefit when you're eating. How many distractions do you have going on? I'm never the person who says that you have to eat, again, at the table by yourself. But I think you should take moments to at least provide some attention to the food, and maybe you limit it to some degree. Maybe instead of eating with music playing and the TV on in the background and with your family screaming and arguing, maybe you just keep it to the food and the screaming, arguing family.
It's funny. So this is, unplanned, but awesome segue to kind of what I wanted to talk about next, which is, mindful athletics. It's not much of a jump to go from mindful eating to mindful athletics or mindful practice. I think, I know, when Ryan and I, for those of you listening, both do engage in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is, it's really one of the places that we put ourselves in on purpose, where mindfulness it becomes almost paramount, right? You really are focused singularly on the one thing that you're doing, right? Whether it's trying to survive or trying to win, right? Either way, there's no phones, there's no email, there's no music, so to speak, although it may be on in the background. You certainly don't have your headset in. This is a little different than, going to the gym and being able to talk to your friends or have your headphones on or whatever the case may be, and purposefully distracting yourself from the lift. This is one of those scenarios where you have to be mindful, right? You have to be in the moment, present. And if you're not, it shows, and typically the match will be over. Yeah. And you're not ever coming up on top.
Right. That idea of mindfulness being thrust upon you is certainly an enticing idea. And, whenever I think about that, I think about rock climbing as well, where that is a sport in which you really have to be mindful. You can't be thinking about the dishes you've got in your sink as you're, one step away from falling off the face of this rock cliff, right? So, yeah, jiu-jitsu is similar. You can't let up that focus, because that could mean that you lose position or you've, got submitted or whatever it might be. How does someone who isn't in a sport like that, where mindfulness is thrust upon you, or that flow state is thrust upon you, how does someone go to the gym and be mindful?
Great question. I think in my younger days, I would have told you the answer is to put your headphones on, which I think by default is
louder.
Yeah, changes things. It keeps other people from talking to you, which is helpful. But yeah, I would say I really, it's got to take some practice, right? You got to
Mm.
be truly, truly paying attention to the movement that you're doing, or not worried about how many you can do or what the weight is, but just, mentally connected to the movement that you're working through.
Mm.
And a good indicator there, or a good way to bring yourself into that state is absolutely to bring your awareness to your breath,
Mm.
right? If you can time or watch your breath go in and out, brain, we know that you can only bring your awareness to one thing at a time. And when we talk about multitasking, if you really are honest with yourself, you're multitasking by paying attention to one thing, then the next, then the next, then the next, then the next, then the next. And maybe you'll circle back around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But those 5 things are really just happening one, then the next, then the next, then the next. So, and even when I give this explanation about, bringing your awareness to your breath, you're going to bring your awareness to your breath, and then it's going to go to the movement, and then back to the breath, and then back to the movement. But that's only 2 things, as opposed to our normal brain patterns, which 5, 6, 7, 8. And you mentioned a word called flow state. And we were talking earlier about this book by a guy named George Mumford called The Mindful Athlete. And he quotes Kobe Bryant as talking about flow state and what that looks like, and why he was so much better at the end of games than others. And, that term locked in or zoned in, right? It's just that he could truly leave everything else that wasn't what he was trying to do off to the side. And that means teammates, relationships, anything that wasn't serving him in that moment was not in his mind. And that set him apart from others. And I think we all know what that feels like whether it's because we're engaged in something we really enjoy, or actually if we're engaged in something we don't like also, right? When we're hyper focused on just getting through, that's flow state. It doesn't mean good or bad. It just means that we're truly focused on that one thing for X amount of time. And as we practice mindfulness, as we practice letting ourselves focus on one thing at a time, what we find is that it gets longer. Those states of attention can get a little longer. You get a little deeper. You find some additional clarity in there. And there's so many side effects to mindfulness and practicing mindfulness that it's tough to explain to somebody what they are until they start to feel them for themselves.
Right. I've always had an issue with the idea that people sell mindfulness as stress reduction when it's not really about that. Like, yes, that is a benefit. People who engage in mindfulness-based practice tend to be less stressed, but I'll have people say, well, I was stressed the other day and then I tried this meditation and it just didn't work. Okay. Well, I mean, that's not the point. The point is not to do this thing when you're stressed. The point is to, be living your life in a mindful way. And so we have these topics of mindful eating and mindful movement and etc. But there are other ways. I mean, you can be mindful in anything that you're doing. You could be mindful in listening to this. We could be mindful in our discussion. We can be mindful in washing the dishes, right? What's the point in worrying about an argument that you had with your spouse while you're washing the dishes, right? And so I think, to your point, this idea of really engaging with the activity that you're doing is in essence what it means to be mindful, is doing something. Yeah, we back to this 10-year-old's doing something with purpose, right?
Yeah.
Washing the dishes because you're washing the dishes, moving because you're moving, eating because you're eating, right? Doing it all with purpose and doing it all in a way that your attention is not divided into a million other directions.
Yeah, well said. And it makes me feel kind of silly because I was just having this conversation with someone, and I was trying to explain how impactful it can be to add a mindfulness practice to your life. And the example I used was, why couldn't you set your timer for 2 minutes before you brush your teeth, right? So now that 2-minute exercise of brushing my teeth becomes 4 minutes of my day, 2 minutes for mindfulness practice and 2 minutes for brushing my teeth. But doesn't that sound silly? Couldn't we do the practice of mindfulness while we're brushing our teeth?
Right.
Couldn't we truly just stay in and watch and brush one tooth and watch it, and then brush the next tooth and watch it, and really stay connected to that aspect of it all?
Right.
The answer is, of course, we could.
Mm.
It's just many of us, including myself, we think we have to do something specific to practice mindfulness. We have to sit, we have to walk, we have to do yoga. But to your point, and it's spot on, what if you could do all things, with purpose? Certainly would take the have to's out of life. And I have to do the dishes. No, you don't have to do the dishes. Just do the dishes. You don't get to do the dishes. You don't have to do the dishes. You're just doing the dishes. That's what you're doing.
Right.
And I would argue that by intentionally doing these things, the side effect is happiness and joy. And at least for me, I know that when I'm intentionally, doing jiu-jitsu, when I leave there, my head is clearer. My mind is a little reprieve from my day. I'm certainly not going to pretend like it all doesn't flood back in afterwards. But if I could use the same opportunity to do the dishes the same way that I do the jiu-jitsu or my athletic practices, I think I would be a little happier.
Yeah, there was this, I think I know we think too much, right? This is, another problem, for another human problem, is that we just think too much, and we're thinking all the time. We are engaging in the thought all the time as well, meaning we're almost entertaining the thoughts. So as we're doing the dishes or brushing our teeth, we're taking it one step further. We have a thought about what we've got to do later on work-wise, and then we're going down the rabbit hole. Well, how's that going to make me feel? Oh, I don't want to do that. And, but what is so-and-so going to think of what I do? Right? Are they going to be happy? And so you're engaging with the thoughts. You're having them because we just have them. And then you're engaging with them, and you're disengaging from the thing that you're actually doing in that moment. When you're right, I think if you do something intentionally with purpose and focus, there is a sense of fulfillment that comes from that. And in the East, they sometimes say that the thinking mind is like the sixth sense, right? And I really like that because, we've got people kind of like walking outside the studio here, and I'll hear them, right? I'm not choosing to hear the footsteps, right? They're just coming, and I'm noticing them, but I'm not engaging with them in a way that I would engage with a thought sometimes. And I like the idea of calling the thinking mind just another sense, because in a way it really is like I'm having a thought that comes up, and I don't really have a choice there. I don't really have a choice whether or not I hear the thought, just like I don't have a choice whether or not I hear the footstep outside the studio. But I do have a choice if I engage with that, right? And I think the practice of observation and just being aware of what's going on, thought wise is important and all encompassing of what we need to practice in mindfulness.
What a great analogy. I think you're spot on. And I know for me, I I will chase those footsteps down for hours. It seems like sometimes it's all that's in there is, 5 specific thoughts that I spend time chasing down.
Mhm.
And I can go, I'm not too proud to admit I can go whole days without
Same.
really being present in what I'm doing, especially if something's eating at me or I have a specific emotion that's prevalent that I haven't addressed. And I would say, lucky for us, we have this way to bring ourselves back to center. And I think we both find it in martial arts. And I hope that everybody listening has something that they find where they can find it, whether it's drawing or art or music or dance or even just if it is just a quiet meditation by yourself. I hope that they can bring themselves back to that, because I think we all inherently know that the way we feel when we're really present and operating with purpose is when we feel our best.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Any other topics on mindfulness that you want to discuss or cover today?
What do you think you would say to someone who has almost no practice in mindfulness? They've just been introduced to it recently. Where can they start?
Great question.
Hmm.
So, from the athlete in me, the coach in me,
Yeah.
what I would say is, number one thing you can do is pay attention to your breath. Okay, so choose an anchor. For me, the breath is the best anchor for me personally because it's a longer process. You're going to feel that air come in through your nose and all the way down. Then you're going to feel the body react all the way out. So tell yourself, I'm going to pay attention to my breath. I'm going to watch my body go in and watch the air come back out. And then every time that you notice your mind has wandered from there, and you won't have to wait long. Look at that as your actual mindfulness practice. So it's not the pay attention to my breath practice. It's I noticed that my mind wandered from the thing I'm trying to do practice. So I'm going to anchor myself with my breath, and I'm going to watch my breath go in and out. And then when my mind wanders, which it will, I'm going to say, okay, all right, cool, 1 rep, back to my mind, back to my breath. Oh, my mind wandered again. Awesome, 2 reps. And what happens is we pretend or we tell ourselves before we even start this practice that we're not going to be good at it because it's a new thing, something we're just trying. And then we reinforce that idea when our mind wanders. We go, oh yeah, I couldn't do it. My mind is too X. My mind is too Y, right? And ultimately, we give up. We're like, nope, couldn't do it. I don't even know how long I was supposed to be paying attention to my breath, but I know that after 5 or 6 seconds, I started thinking about lunch. And then when you yelled at me and told me to bring it back, about 10 seconds later, I started thinking about, yesterday. And instead of saying to yourself, sweet, that's 2 reps, right? I'm on my quest for 1 million. So now I'm on rep number 3, back to my breath. And what I would say to people is not too far into your practice, not too far in, whether it's 5 minutes in or 7, not too far in, do you start to notice things that you've never noticed before. You start to, at the beginning, for me, new thoughts came in, thoughts that I had never really dealt with or noticed before. And while then you're very much in that trap, you want to run down those new thoughts. Oh man, that's a new way to think about something I was thinking about so often. I want to run that thought down. Oh, no, wait, sorry. No, that's another rep. Back to the breath. Eventually, you can start to move through those thoughts. let them all go, see them for what they are, just that extra sixth sense like you were talking about. Start to get a little deeper and a little further along. And then eventually you can start to use this practice during your day, right? My breath is the anchor that never leaves me when I am upset, angry, frustrated. I can say, all right, I'm going to go back to that breath, that anchor that I have, and then just notice. Nope. two breaths in, I started thinking about how upset I was. All right, do it again.
Right.
Oh, now this time it was 5 breaths, and I started thinking about something that happened 3 days ago. Okay, again, rep again. So there's a long way to say, if you really want to just try starting a mindfulness practice, approach it with a beginner's mind. Use your breath as your anchor, and give yourself time. Give yourself reps.
Yeah. Allow yourself to be imperfect for a moment and actually get better at this thing that is challenging. People have so much difficulty engaging in something that's uncomfortable, and it could be uncomfortable because you're unsure, or you think that you're not good at it, or whatever that might be. And it's a shame that people will allow themselves to disengage with something like that, because it is somewhat challenging, right? But I think the way you explained it, in terms of being proud that you you paid attention to one breath, right? There are probably plenty of people who have never even paid attention to their breath, right? It's so automatic. I mean, that might be a revelation to them to think about breathing, to really pay attention to all the sensations that come with breathing. And I think anyone who's spent any time meditating knows that you start observing different things. You might find something new every time you sit down and do a quick meditation. One thing that I will sometimes do is like a candle meditation. And I find candle meditations to be helpful because you're pulling your awareness outside of your own body, and you're placing it on something else. And this is really helpful. It's really helpful to be able to externalize your focus and place it into something or someone else.
Can you just describe that candle meditation, the act of meditating with the candle?
Sure. Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll set a 5 or 10 minute timer, sometimes no timer at all, and light a candle, place it in front of me, and literally just observe. Just observe. What am I noticing? And I'll focus specifically on the flame, and I'll just try to see if I find anything new. And it is interesting because there's always something new I observe, and you wouldn't think so. You're like, oh, right, you've seen flames plenty of times. You've seen fire, right? Well, you try. You'll notice behaviors of the flame. You'll notice, the way the wind, or air currents affect it. And this is all. It's a very valuable skill to be able to pull yourself out of your head into something else. And they know that research has shown that when we are really in our head, our brains and minds are very active. Doing this external focus type of meditation is helpful for literally and physically restructuring the brain to think more outwardly. And I'd argue that that is a practice that everyone can benefit from. I mean, think about it, in the context of social anxiety. When you're talking with someone, you should be focused on what they're saying. You should be really listening to them, really engaging deeply on them, really connecting. But so often we find ourselves internally focused. What did what I just say, did that land? Was that awkward? What are they thinking? Do they not like me? Why are they saying that? Right? When none of that matters, none of that is even relevant. And I find I connect best with people when I'm very outwardly focused. And yeah, you can get better at that by engaging more in these kind of external meditations.
Wow. That's kind of eye-opening for me.
Mm.
I spent I do engage in a mindfulness practice, and that's not one that I had ever done. Well, maybe, sitting by the campfire, probably just
Right.
drawn to it.
Right.
The examples you used about the way the fire moves certainly resonate. And it's definitely something I'm going to try.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can do that with any object. I mean, the candle seems to be the easiest just because, well, we tend to be naturally drawn to fire as humans. So that's a little bit of baked into our genetic code, I think. But yeah, you try these. You want to try a meditation sometimes that's contrary to your environment. And what I mean by that is, if you're in a very stimulating environment, such as an airport, where everything is, happening around you. There's so much noise. There's so many people. There's just a ton going on. It's very helpful to go inward and have a breath centric meditation, right? It's exactly opposite of what you naturally want to do. And like I said, in the candle meditation, if you're finding yourself very inwardly focused, then great. It's exactly what you want to do is watch the fire, pay attention to that, pay attention outwardly, right?
I love that. I think that's two perfect examples of one inward and one outward.
Yeah.
And I think it really hits home with the point that I think we're trying to make about it's not about being rigid. It's not about, having to or doing it. It's about, to quote our favorite 10-year-old, right? It's just about paying attention on purpose without judgment. And the more often we do that, the more we quote unquote practice that, the more we start to live that mindful life. And we know specifically, me and you know how beneficial that is when you're really doing anything, and how much it improves your relationship with the people around you, how much it improves your relationship with yourself. And to go back to, kind of the mindful athlete and George Mumford, he talks about how much it can shorten the time it takes to be proficient at something, right? So, we can all talk to each other about, something we learned at work and then we had to execute on. It doesn't matter what your skill or your job is. We know that if you spent 3 hours, half learning and half being distracted, or you could spend that 1 hour zoned in the moment, only focused on learning that one skill. Then we talk about professional athletes and what that looks like, or just athletes in general and what that looks like. And there's absolutely no doubt in anybody's mind that when you practice being mindful while you're learning, you're gonna exceed the people that are distracted while they're learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a benefit to everything that you're engaging with. Just at least being aware that you can be mindful, right? And you said it at the start of this, is that it's called a practice for a reason. It's because you can't be perfect. It's probably impossible to be 100% mindful. And if it's not, I mean, I'm certainly nowhere in the ballpark.
That makes two of us.
But yeah, just being aware that it's an option and something that you can do in each moment, I think is really important.
Well, I certainly appreciate having this conversation with you. I enjoyed engaging in it in a mindful way. I love the topic, and your explanation on the candle meditation is something I'm going to take home with me. So
Great.
Thank you again for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
And we're looking forward to our next conversation.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again.